I love herons. We do have a lot on the rivers here. Yeah, and I really respond to herons. I love the way that they move very slowly and carefully. They're very patient. They just hang out and they eat a lot. I like that part about them too. I would love to just be patient, moving slowly, and eating a lot.
It's like the animal equivalent of being a late middle-aged man, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. There I am. I am the heron. Welcome, everyone, to the Two Real Cinema Club. My name is Andres Lorente.
And I'm James Ruzicka. And every episode on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch two films. We watch a new film, and then we watch an old film, and we try and compare A with B. And this week, we're talking about the new film from Studio Ghibli. Very exciting. Japanese animation studio who, for my money, have as impressive and beautiful a library as Disney. And if you know me, you know that's something I would not say lightly. I have a lot of time for Disney. The director at the studio, Hayao Miyazaki, he's retired, I think, 4 times by now. He's 83.
Jeez. He
keeps coming out of retirement to make another picture. So this is his first film for 10 years, The Boy and the Heron. The first film since The Wind Rises in 2013. And we're going to be comparing it with what I think, spoiler, is his 1988 masterpiece. It's the source of Studio Ghibli's mascot. We're watching My Neighbour Totoro. Are these films new to you, is that right?
They both are new to me, yes. Although I was amazed. Totoro is 35 years old, 36 years old, something like that. I mean, it feels like an 80s film, so I wasn't surprised when I saw it that it was from 1988, but I was surprised that he's been making films that long, but then again, dude's old, right?
Yeah, he is old, isn't he?
83.
I think his first Studio Ghibli feature was 1984. So apparently it's taken them like 10 years to make this film.
Wow.
So I think he has been working fairly consistently on it since The Wind Rises.
Yeah.
And it's cost something like $160 million, I think, or something like that. Did I read? I think they spent an enormous amount of money on it.
And allegedly somewhat autobiographical, I guess. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, perhaps we'll kind of talk about that after we've talked about the film a bit, because I think it is very autobiographical. We'll kind of chime in with some little autobiographical details. Do you want to start by telling us the story?
So this is, as you said, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. He wrote it, and I'm really depending on you to tell us how much is based on his life. The cast features some names you know for sure. I watched the English version. Did you watch it in English, or could you watch it in Japanese with subtitles? I think that might have made it better for me. That was one reason I had a little difficulty getting engaged with it. Was I think the Christian Bale voice in particular. We'll talk about that probably, but you saw it in English as well. Then
we did see it in English. I think it's the only version available. I don't think there is a Japanese subtitled version that's been in the cinemas here.
Probably not. Well, in IMDb, if you look it up, there is a fully Japanese voiced production.
But it didn't make it over here because we don't like reading in this country.
Hell no. Luca Padovan, Christian Bale, Florence Pugh, Dave Bautista, Willem Dafoe, Robert Pattinson. It's interesting because I don't, after the fact, I thought, okay, I guess that's who those people were, but I don't focus too much on the theme behind the characters and who's actually reading what part. So those are the actors and actresses there.
I mean, if you put those people in a live action film, that's $200 million right there, isn't it?
It's big money, but it's interesting to see, they're coming in after the fact and sort of just voicing the characters. I wonder how much they cost there.
Yeah.
Let's start talking about the film. I'm just going to sort of focus on setting it up, and then we'll spoil it with the bell, and then we'll come back and spoil it even more. So... Opens, it feels like it's World War II in Tokyo, and a hospital's being bombed, and this is where Mahito's, the young male protagonist, probably about 10 years old or something like that, just a young man. His mother is convalescing there, I guess. he's unable to get to her in time as she passes away without really saying goodbye. Her hospital and lots of Tokyo had been bombed. Hospital's on fire. There's some fantastic imagery where the people look like ghosts. Everyone other than Mahito, as he's going through the streets, they already look like ghosts, and these are the living, It's a very eerie scene, which really evokes just some of the horrible realities of World War II and the atrocities that happened to the Japanese at that time. Thereafter, Mahito and his father, which is Shoichi. You're better with these names.
Oh, quite possibly. I didn't write him on my list, but yeah, I believe that.
That's Shoichi, and I think that's Christian Bale's character. And to me, his accent was very strange. It sounded like a rough around the edges Boston accent for, I guess, a Tokyo or Japanese businessman. They moved to the country estate that seems to be part of his mother's family. And he's got an airplane glass factory. I think that's what it was. They were sort of doing glass work for planes or something. And lo and behold, Mahito will find that he has a new and pregnant stepmother there, who is apparently his aunt. And she greets them. And when they arrive, as I said, she's pregnant. She lives in this house that's occupied with this elderly posse of relatives and servants, a group of maybe 6 very old women. I think Miyazaki has something for old people. He doesn't treat the aged with much respect in terms of their looks. They always seem very old and very withered. So imagine a group of 6 ancient women running around the house, sort of helping and serving on Mahito. The estate itself is in a state of deterioration, especially this off-limits stone castle-like outbuilding that a great-uncle created years ago, and where currently a heron nests. But this is no ordinary heron. The heron and a number of other animals, including very aggressive fish and frogs who envelope and hug, nearly molesting Mahito. They promise to help him find his mother, who is still very much alive. But when his stepmother disappears during an illness, Mahito sets out to find his mother. But which mother will he find? I want to set it up like that with a question.
Yeah. So that's almost like the end of the first act, I suppose.
That's what I'm trying to do that. I think I'm copying you. I think that's kind of what you do. You usually throw in a few more things after that, but you do it so expertly that I wanted to try and reduce it to one act, and then we can spoil Belle, and then we can really start spoiling it.
but excuse me, before we spoil, there are probably a couple of things worth mentioning for people who want to pause the pod before they see the actual film. I don't know about you, I thought this is a beautiful film. It's hand-drawn animation. It's beautifully rendered. It's filled with striking images. I think you're never waiting very long for a beautiful moment in this film, or like an unexpected vista, or like a perfectly observed, captured little bit of animated movement. I think it's a sumptuous film, a feast for the eyes, a lesser critic might say.
Ooh, we don't have lesser critics on this podcast.
But
why would we quote them?
I tell you what I wrote here, which is I wrote this film is a bit like a greatest hits of Studio Ghibli. And so we have seen almost all of them, and this movie comes across as a kind of a greatest hits of the themes and the moments. And I put this in my notes, and I was quite pleased with this. But like a band's greatest hits compilation, it doesn't quite hang together the way that the original albums did. Which means basically, I really enjoyed this film, but it was a bit bitty.
Yeah. For my money, you're being very generous. I think that's a euphemism for incoherent, isn't it? I found it to be a little bit incoherent, especially after, like the setup. That first act is what I understood. I stop understanding not long after the first act. So for me, it was, that makes sense. Your assessment makes sense to me, because I did find it hard to follow, especially once they get into this other world and all that we'll talk about. But for me, it wasn't, it doesn't hang together, but in a way that it's not all great stuff, but it just doesn't work because it's all great stuff. It's more that it never really matches up one thing to the next. So to call it bitty, I think you're meaning like small bits that don't really kind of join up. Yeah. I think that's due.
I mean, it's kind of dream logic, I sort of thought it was. It's like...
It's exactly what it is, yeah.
It's kind of, one thing becomes another, and then it becomes another thing. And, like nothing, it doesn't quite tie together as a whole. And I must say, I mean, I did get to the end of the film, and a little bit like waking up from a dream. I exited the cinema, and I found it quite difficult to remember what had happened, and what order it had all happened in. Yeah, in just the same way that a dream gradually fades away over breakfast. Yeah, it has that kind of elusive feeling. Yeah, I do wonder whether quite early on in the film. I mean, it begins as a dream, doesn't it? In that very, very opening image, the first thing you see is this raid on Tokyo, and Mojito is asleep. Very annoying that he's called Mojito, because whenever I type any notes, it's auto-corrected to the name of that Mexican drink. But
it's a Cuban drink, and it made me thirsty.
It's a Cuban drink. Oh my God!
Every time I got auto-corrected, I was like, I do have rum, I've got lime. I don't really have the tonic water, and I definitely don't have fresh mint. Same thing happened to me. And but you're right about the dreams.
I mean, it starts with him asleep in bed, doesn't it? Yeah. And there's a few times when he goes to sleep, and he even gets a head injury. Yep. And I feel like there are all these points that make you think, is the rest of the film like a hallucination or a dream? You could interpret it as being just a great big long dream sequence following one of these moments when he gets into bed.
That's definitely what it feels like. And my sister always says, and I agree with her, she just never wants to hear about other people's dreams. It's just not that interesting. So to spend $120 million to put it on screen just seems a little self-indulgent. And I do get, it's just hard to communicate dreams. And if it's something that's very individual, and we talked about this as being sort of a personal story, and I suspect the personal story stuff comes around the mother, and some of the illness or some of the changes with the stepmother in his life, because the rest of it couldn't be autobiographical. Some of the stuff that happens, like talking to a heron who's got a human head coming out of his mouth. Unlikely, Mr. Miyazaki. But I think other people's dreams are hard to communicate. They're hard to really engage with, and for me, it was just hard to follow. So I like your analysis of it being sort of a dreamscape movie.
I will remind you that when we were both at film school together, one of the precepts of the course was that films are dreams.
They are, yeah.
I remember being told that many, many times. And maybe that's why I can remember so little of what I learned in film school. It just evaporated away as I woke.
Yeah, for me, what I took away from that is that they're like collective dreams. You're sitting in the dark, you're falling asleep very often. You're watching something together. And I think there's a difference between taking an individual dream and trying to turn it into a collective dream after spending a lot of money on it, or just experiencing a collective dream that's not designed as a dream. This is definitely like, in the film, as you said, it's sort of dreams inside of dreams, and he's taking a dream and putting it in the cinema, I think. So there's a little subtle, some nuance there that explains how films are like dreams.
Nuance. See, that's what I always miss, nuance. Shall we ring the spoiler bell at least?
Please, yeah.
And then spoil the hell out of these dreams. I'm going to ring it now, okay.
Ruining people's dreams. That's what we do here at the Two Real Cinema Club. Dream wreckers.
So here's a spoiler. It turns out the whole world is a block puzzle, eh? Didn't see that coming.
Is that Jenga? I thought that was Jenga. I don't know much about the board games. Yeah,
it's Jenga.
It's a 13-piece Jenga set, basically. That's our existence.
I did the maths on this. So at the end of the kind of the big long dream sequence, Mojito finds out what the real story is behind this kind of curious dream world that he enters, and it's all been kind of dreamt up by his great uncle, who is moving these 13 block puzzle pieces around to try and create a new world. It's all kind of very dreamlike. I did the maths. 13 blocks gives you 8,000 possible combinations.
Ooh, wow.
So that's it. So we can look forward to 7,999 sequels to The Boy and the Heron coming out next year.
On a universal or a planetary level, I love that idea, because the Earth has changed so much in 4 billion years, and it's been both a very welcoming environment as well as a very hostile environment. So I like some of the ideas here. There's some fantastic stuff, and there's that hovering rock or stone that has these magical powers too. But by that point, I was so lost that I could only grab a little bit here and there and have fun with some of the ideas without really putting them all together.
as the film becomes wackier and wackier, there are many more great moments that I really enjoyed and that I really remember, though I don't think I could tell you quite what order they come. There is a relatively early moment on which you kind of mentioned earlier on, when Mojito, he kind of first encounters the heron and it's beckoning him to join him, and he's gradually overpowered by all these frogs crawling over him. It's an amazing image. And they're only kind of dispelled when the pregnant stepmother comes running out of the house with a bow and arrow. That's one of the most memorable moments of the film, because that really won me over to her character, who before that seems a little bit kind of cold and not entirely sympathetic. But this kind of badass pregnant woman coming out with a bow and arrow, I kind of really enjoyed that. I thought that was a good turning point for the beginning of the adventure. You were kind of saying, we were kind of discuss how much of the film is autobiographical. Yes, apparently. Miyazaki's father did own a factory which produced aeroplane parts. His mother was in the hospital a lot, I think, when he was young, and then eventually died when he was young. They did move out to the country. I think they did have money and lived in quite a nice place. So I think a lot of those elements are fairly closely modelled on his life, and kind of the main takeaway idea, kind of the kernel of the film I came away with basically was that this bird, this heron, the titular heron of the film, is grief. I think, is that right? The bird is grief. That he's kind of initially haunted by it, and then he kind of learns to defeat it and kind of turn that energy into something positive. He's kind of he's able to sort of not only defeat grief but also kind of turn grief into a kind of ally. I think that's sort of how the story of the film works, and I think that's the level that it's intended to be interpreted at. But I could be wrong.
I hope you're not, because that's much more than I have. That's good. That's good. I want to hear more, because I thought it was about frogs almost swallowing a human being alive. That's definitely happening too. I mean, it's interesting that there is this. He's very often just on the edge of sort of dying himself as well, I think, and that makes sense that he's been haunted by his mother's death, and these sort of thoughts come up. The frogs are all over him at one point. There are various creatures that are sort of like outnumbering and we're talking to him, and the fish, right? Aren't the fish in the river and they're dancing in front of him? And
and then later on there's a whole army of parakeets, isn't there? Like this enormous parakeet empire.
That's right. Yeah, the parakeet. Oh God, the parakeets. Yeah. And then he just seems to be very often in peril. So I think that's probably a good point, is that he's so probably obsessed with death as a kid, his age, who'd lost his mother, probably would be. So grief makes sense. The heron is a strange character, because he's also a trickster, right?
Yes.
He brings him into the castle. I'm going to show you your mother. Your mother melts. Well, she's liquid. She just disappears before he can even really interact with her. And then the heron, as I sort of alluded to earlier, there's a human form inside the heron. So you feel like this is no ordinary heron, obviously. But there's something human about this heron, to the point where, what is it? It's like the mouth is falling apart, and then this human head, very baldish. Think Bob Hoskins, maybe someone like that, right? Balding, short, stout. Paul Giamatti would have been great as the heron too.
It's Paul Giamatti in a bird suit.
Yeah, yes. So it's like this little human form coming out of the bird suit as well. So he could relate to grief, if we're going to go with the grief thing. You could relate to it because it was personified. It sort of became anthropomorphized, I guess.
But then there's a whole bunch of other threads inside the film as well, which are sort of touched upon but never really quite explored properly. So when Mojito gets kind of sucked into this strange sort of subterranean dream world, he enters by literally sinking through the floor of the magical tower in the back garden. But he takes along a servant woman with him. And the servant woman is kind of transformed into this tiny doll. But at the same time, he also meets a young, really dynamic fisherwoman who has the same name as the servant woman, and so she's probably an alternative version of this same woman. And yet that's never kind of really very deeply explored. They catch this enormous fish together and gut it, and then they have to sort of feed it to these tiny little floating sort of they're like sort of potatoes that float in the sky. I mean, there's a whole bunch of kind of crazy images that just kind of follow one another, and a lot of them not really very deeply explored. We glance at them and then move on, and they're not entirely tied up come the end.
No,
the dynamic fisherwoman, she does come back very briefly at the end.
Yeah,
the little sort of the floating potatoes. I'm not sure what comes of them. They do look like they would make fun soft toys that you could sell in the Studio Ghibli shop, but none of it is quite tied together. The parakeets are a relatively late entry in the story, and then they end up kind of being some kind of malign army with kind of these cultish signs that they're all carrying. It's a whole strange kind of melange of images.
Yeah.
And then the end of the film is very abrupt, I think, isn't it?
Super abrupt, yeah.
It just suddenly ends.
It suddenly ends, yeah. They move back to Tokyo. It says 2 years later, we moved back to Tokyo, and then bam, a very dull set of credits on a blue screen with another strange song ends the film. It's very abrupt. We just talked about endings, or maybe we're going to be talking about endings soon, and this is not a great ending for a film that's supposed to be so monumental, I guess, and so personal. It feels like there should be a better, more personal ending, because you just feel kind of left. It's just like the filmmaker just left you at one point.
The closing image, I think, is an interesting choice for a filmmaker of 83 years, insofar as Mahito kind of packs up his things.
Yep.
And he leaves his little bedroom that he's occupied in this sort of big country house. Yeah, and he walks off screen, and we're just left with a view of an empty room.
Yep,
and it feels a little bit like Miyazaki's own kiss off to the film industry, insofar as he's made his final statement, told his autobiographical story, and now he's going to exit stage left.
Yeah.
And just leave an empty stage behind.
I think the thing I took from that was that maybe that's where the whole story happened. I mean, he has he's taken a stone or something like that and bludgeoned himself because he doesn't want to go to school because he was being bullied. And so I feel like that part was real life. And then I feel like almost as if everything that happens thereafter, there might be a few sort of more real moments, let's say, but I think a lot of that was dreaming. And some of it was directly, you'd see him dreaming, and all of a sudden we'd have a scene that seemed very dreamlike.
Yeah.
So I felt like that's where the film takes place, is in that room, and now he's leaving that room. And so the film is basically over, and his life is obviously going to change. But to just stick it on and say, 2 years later we moved to Tokyo, seems like a bit of a cop-out. It seems like there could be something better there. But I think that when you were talking about Kiriko, which is the character it's the old woman who goes along on the journey into the netherworld, the underworld, and then she becomes a statue, and then she becomes this fisher person. That seemed to me like a very clear connection. You know how we take things from real life and they just pop up in our dreams immediately? It's almost right on the nose, That seemed like exactly what he was doing. He was taking material from his life, being cared for by all these women, and then taking it into a dream and just spinning a character out of a real life character. So that made sense to me. A lot of the other things don't make sense. The parakeets, to me, there was like a clear Mussolini leader parrot.
Ah, right, yes.
So then I thought, okay, because this World War II stuff is sort of creeping back in, because the parrots are all colorful, but they're just repeating whatever their leader says, and they have this incredible worship for this one individual, big, strong parrot. And then that parrot is sort of dictating, or he's trying to work with the great uncle who's sort of the architect in the maze of all of this. And I felt like that was World War II stuff getting in there, creeping in there.
Yep.
But Ed, you're absolutely right. I think there's just a lot of stuff, and it doesn't all really connect that well together. I loved the little potato ghost babies. I mean, I thought that was very interesting, and that was one of the things that really made me think. Because at one point, Kiriko and Mahito have to feed the little ghost babies so that they can go on this journey. So they're eating this fish, and then they sort of get inflated enough, I guess. They can self-inflate. They self-inflate, they go into the sky, and they spin into this beautiful, almost like DNA spiral. But then the pelicans come along and start eating them up one by one. So it's this lesson of life, I think. Like, there is a cycle of life. And that all these beings you almost get the sensation that they're going to go become stars or something like that, or they're going to go out into the universe and be living beings elsewhere. There was a really neat message there, but it was lost. I mean, it wasn't lost on me, I guess. But I mean, I think it would probably be, it's lost in the story, let's say. It just doesn't fit into the story too well. And sometimes you feel like he's doing a real kid's film, and sometimes you feel like he's doing something super cerebral for some sort of intellectual group or gang of philosophers or something like that. And it's, a lot of animations do try and hit both an adult audience and a children's audience, but this is two totally different planes. It's almost like the thing takes place in two different universes.
I wonder whether there's a temptation, if you've been working on a film for 10 years and you kind of think, well, if I make another film that takes me another 10 years, I'll be 93 by then. I better put everything I've got into this one. So it's just kind of, every time you have an idea, tip it in. We'll have that too. We'll have that as well. Tip it in. Go on. Mix it all together. So you end up with this kind of big, heavy soup with every ingredient in it. Yeah. And it's and every mouthful is sparkling and fascinating, but oh my goodness, it's a lot to eat.
Yeah. Yeah, but there, as you said at the outset, there's some fantastic filmmaking. It feels very film-like, not just an animation. It feels very film-like at times. And in the last few months, I think we've really looked at set design pretty carefully in terms of like when we did Once Upon a Time in the West and the Killers of the Flower Moon especially. And, like the wallpaper in this film is fantastic. The deteriorating, rotting wood of parts of the house is fantastic. So there's just this texture to it that is just next level. So I would say that you're seeing a filmmaker at his superpowers in terms of like the details and the way I won't say camera moves, but that's exactly what it does, is like the camera moving through some of the animation backgrounds is fantastic. And there, you can see the visual storytelling. It doesn't really all add up, but it's beautifully done. You can imagine this as a film, shot on film and with real live actors. Like in a live action film, you can sort of see that in places.
Disney have a trend at the moment of remaking their animated classics as live action films.
That's right.
I wonder whether once all the current top people in Studio Ghibli retire or pass on, they'll have a fantastic library there that I wonder whether somebody will then try and remake as in real life. So maybe you will get your, I don't know, whether it's wish or nightmare or I don't know. There's one other little detail I do want to kind of talk about, which is just me admitting how stupid I was watching the film. Insofar as, I sort of more or less understood that that Natsuko, the stepmother, was the sister of Mahito's mother. So I kind of got that. But what I didn't get until the very, very end of the film, which was that the fire girl of his own age that he meets, this kind of feisty girl, she's a fire spirit and she's going to help him find his stepmother. Yeah. And I didn't realize until the very last moment of the film, really, that, that is his mother. That's his mother. As a girl.
Yep.
And I wonder how early on did you realise what was going on there? Because I must say I was far too stupid and had to have it really spelled out to me before I got that.
I probably got it about the same time you did.
Oh, you're being charitable, I can tell, but thank you.
No, well, because the first time we see her, she's firebombing the pelicans who are eating the potato puff people. Yeah. So that's the first time we see her, and it's not a major character. We're not guaranteed that she's going to come back or anything like that. We just see her do this sort of brave and admirable thing, and then he notices her, and then they get sort of into this like castle structure with all the doors, and that's where they start sort of experiencing what might be his psyche or the world together. It occurred to me a little bit, and then, in working backwards, I realized, her job was basically to introduce him to his next mother, to sort of bring him in, which is her sister.
Right.
Because the whole idea is we're going to take you to your mother. She's very much alive. And it's sort of like about changing his perspective. Okay, maybe she's not an awful stepmother. Maybe she can be my next mother figure, and she is my mother's sister. So she's technically my aunt, now my mother. It gets confusing, of course, but that seems to be like the purpose of the journey is for him to recognize Natsuko as his new mother, and his old mother's going to introduce that idea to him and kind of reintroduce the aunt to him as the mother. It's a little complicated, but I think that's what the purpose was, because if it's the journey. When you set on a journey like this, they say, "Hey, we're going to show you your mother." So that's the end goal. You see all these other things are splitting fish open and feeding potato puff kids and all that, but ultimately the goal is you're going to see your mother. And it's not the mother that he thinks it's going to be, but it is the mother who probably, is with him for 50, 60 years. I don't know, but probably the majority of his life. He remembers his birth mother a little bit, but it's his stepmother who's going to be in his life for a long time. So I think that's it. And there was probably a lot of torture in their relationship, and it might have been difficult to come to accept that, but maybe this film is showing how it was difficult.
Yeah, that's a really nice interpretation, actually. Yeah, so you lied earlier on. You kind of said that you didn't get much out of it, and you've cut straight to the core. That is actually a really beautiful way of looking at the film. And I think you're exactly right. Yeah, your mother is alive. It's not the mother that you think of. Yeah, that is sweet. I might have to watch this film again now that I've spoken to somebody who knows what it's actually about.
Oof. Well, honestly, I didn't know that it was about that at all until you started talking. I get a lot. I get just as much as our listeners out of these podcasts. So literally, it really it comes to me much later. You have to think about it quite a bit. And I'm going to say I don't need to see the film again to figure that out. We should let the listeners know it's 2 hours and 2 minutes or something. That's just a little bit over 2 hours.
Yeah, it probably is slightly too long.
Yeah, I think compared to Totoro, which is an hour and 30 and tighter in a sense, I think 2 hours for an animated film. Again, I guess this is an epic. This is a big work for him and his final work and all that, or his next final work. I'm sure he's going to have another final work, but probably a little longish, especially because I did start to turn off a little bit. I was just overwhelmed with information. I was trying to make sense of things that you can't really make sense of, and I think that made the last half hour really difficult for me.
Yeah, it's too much. Well, there's one problem when you put a lot of material in a film, which is that by the time you start gathering more and more material, maybe sometimes if you take a step back, you might realize that a couple of the things you've put in were cliches and not quite as clever as you thought they were when you first wrote it. I feel a bit bad about this because I think the Studio Ghibli films generally are consistent and fantastic, but I'm still going to call the Cliche Squad.
Cliche Squad.
I can't fault you.
I mean, my attitude to this is that Hayao Miyazaki, he's like a proper auteur. He's really stamped his identity on Japanese animated cinema. But I feel like at this stage now, his movies could basically come with a bingo card. You could tick off the things that appear, and and this film would fill the whole bingo card. Basically, this film features all of Hayao Miyazaki's kind of personal obsessions and recurring themes. So I started a little list on the side of my notebook here, and I quickly got halfway down the page. Yeah. Only a few minutes into the film. So there is a mother in hospital.
Yep.
There is a move to the country, both of which we will see in Totoro.
Yep.
There is a feisty girl, like in Spirited Away or Kiki's Delivery Service.
Yep.
There's aeroplane engineering, like we see in Porco Rosso and The Wind Rises. Wow. There is a bow and arrow, which we see in Princess Mononoke. Mm-hmm. All these kind of themes. A door is a portal to other worlds, which we see in Howl's Moving Castle. Comical old ladies, you see that in all the films. Yep. Frogs settling into a new class at school. A mythical animal with strangely human teeth. I mean, it's endless.
Yeah.
These are the things that he is interested in. He puts them in every film. They're in this film. They're not really cliches. The Cliche Squad haven't got a leg to stand on here. They're not cliches. They are, what I wrote in my notes here, they're not cliches. They are signatures.
There you go.
They are brush strokes.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are the elements. These are like the 13 geometric blocks.
Yeah.
And he is able to build 8,000 films out of those 13 blocks. And here is another one. So, I think we're just enjoying those same geometric blocks.
Yeah. They're repetitions from one film to the next. And I've, seen these two films together. I noticed so many of those. There's also neighbors who are clues to other worlds or keys to other worlds. It seems like there's always some old lady who comes up, oh, yeah, I used to live here. Or, I can show you this new world. I think you're right. I mean, does that differ from a cliche? It's like a personal cliche almost, right? Because it's within his body of work. It sort of repeats to the point where it becomes cliche in the Miyazaki world. Maybe that's what
if it's your own personal cliche, then you can call it a theme, can't you? I suppose.
Yep.
A motif.
A motif. There you go. For me, the one that always just hurts me a little bit is the architect setting up this confusing world that no one understands, and there aren't really rules for the viewer to follow, and kind of ultimately disappoints everyone. So I call it, it's kind of like Deus Ex Machina, because you get this explanation at the end of what's really been going on, but it's also I don't know if this exists, Deus in Machina, because it happens in the film, and it's actually kind of the whole basis of the film. So for me, that's just a major cliche. We've seen it in things like The Matrix and again, really. But for me, it's like you're basing a whole film on something that is kind of disappointing because it's just God is in the works ultimately. You don't have to set things up logically where things make sense in terms of the story order and the scenes don't hang together, because it's just, there's this master architect who's designed everything. You can't really understand it.
I mean, he looks very much like the kind of the sort of the Western ideal of God as well, isn't he? He's a big old man with messy grey hair.
Yep.
Who probably sits on a cloud when he has spare time to do so. I mean, it's just what he looks like.
So for me, that's a more harmful cliche in the sense that it's not a motif, it's not a theme, it's not something that it's a brushstroke unique to him. It's more that it's kind of this story crutch, I guess.
And that's something that we should look at sometime is architects in films, because architects are, commonly appear in films.
Yeah.
But the architects that you see in films are never people who are worrying about how they're going to fit the pipes in to get the toilet there, or how thick do we need to make these walls so they can hold the ceiling up.
Yeah.
I suspect that a real architect probably gets just as annoyed at their screen counterparts as we do at doctors and teachers.
Yes.
Well, okay. Shall we have a little break? We'll return from the dream world and stretch our legs for a minute, and then when we come back, we'll kind of plunge back into the kind of the animated universe, and we'll talk about My Neighbour Totoro. Well, we're a little way into a new year, and maybe you've bought a new TV. Maybe it's an OLED, or a QLED, or a micro LED, or 55 inches, or 65 inches, or 75 inches. It's bright, and it's sparkly, and it's vivid, but there's one thing that hasn't changed. Your remote. For all the new technology in your TV, your remote is still the same cheap Atari controller-looking plastic stick it's always been. But not anymore, thanks to the Two Real Cinema Club Remototron, our very own custom remote control that brings TV into the 21st century with a host of new buttons. Sick of all that talking? Too much dialogue on your movie or TV show? Well, one press of the Christopher Nolan button makes the music deafeningly loud, drowning out most of the words. Is your TV program too short? Just press the Netflix Arise button, and instantly your television will drag the story out to 10 hours, with endless repetition of the same clips and story strands that go nowhere, before suddenly cancelling the show completely just as it's getting good. Do you like ads? Well, click the YouTube button, and you can get everything on your TV interrupted by ads every 2 to 4 minutes. Even the ads will be interrupted by ads. The Scorsese button will let you watch characters get shot at point-blank range every 6 minutes, no matter what the show is. The Wes Anderson button will make everything on screen look like a twee model. And if you want to look sort of a bit feminist and progressive while not really thinking too hard about all the details, the Barbie button is the one for you. The Two Real Cinema Club Remototron. The world of Hollywood is just a click away.
Awesome. That's exactly what I need.
Exactly what we bloody don't need. And we are back. Back to talk about, now I've got a question here. We are going to talk about the 1988 Studio Ghibli film, also directed by Hayao Miyazaki. And I am going to call this film My Neighbour Totoro. But I'm not sure that's quite right. Are you saying Totoro? Are you saying Totoro?
I don't know much about Japanese, but I don't think there aren't accents, right?
So it should be My Neighbour Totoro.
Yeah, Totoro.
Maybe it's Totoro.
I think, I don't, we put a lot of emphasis on certain syllables, and I don't think the Japanese do that, so it's Totoro. Totoro. What did you say? You said Totoro, right?
Totoro, because I think the English language version that I watched with a broadly American cast dubbing the voices, they all say Totoro.
Totoro, yeah.
But that might not be correct. My brother's wife, who is Japanese, often complains that non-Japanese speakers think they're so cool when they try to speak Japanese by saying everything in a kind of monotone. And she says, no, Japanese people don't talk like that at all. We put lots of expression in. What are you doing? So I can not claim to be an expert. I'm going to stick with Totoro because it's what we all say in our house.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 1988, this is the film which gave rise to Studio Ghibli's mascot. You can buy a Totoro in all shapes and sizes for your soft toy collection. And probably their most recognizable character, maybe their most recognizable film. The version that's on Netflix internationally, it's got another stellar voice cast. Dakota Fanning and Elle Fanning play the sisters.
God.
Would you be interested to know why I chose this film?
I would. Yeah, I'm supposed to ask that perhaps, but I like the fact that you made it a yes/no for me. Yes.
Do you have any other questions for me, Counselor?
Basically, a new Miyazaki film is a rarity. I mean, so we've had the first one for 10 years just now. And I think this is his finest picture. And I think it's worth noting that long-term listeners will remember that My Neighbour Totoro featured in our best films under 90 minutes popcorn counter.
Oh.
So we have already talked about this film a little bit. This interestingly, this was the third proper Studio Ghibli film. So they made Nausicaa Valley of the Wind first in 1984, Castle in the Sky in 1986, and they were both kind of big fantastical science fiction films. They had kind of robots and air battles and these kind of huge events, and it was all big scale sci-fi. And when they came to make this film, they found it hard to get backing to make something which was kind of smaller or more personal.
Yeah.
So the only way they were able to secure funding for My Neighbour Totoro, I'm already getting it wrong. Can't believe it. What hope for the future? Can't get it right already. Was by pairing this project by combining it into a double bill. So they made Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbour Totoro back to back. And in Japan, at least, they were released as a double bill. Grave of the Fireflies is the only Studio Ghibli film I haven't seen. All I know about it is that it is apparently utterly heartbreaking, which means that there's kind of never a day when I feel entirely comfortable sitting down to watch it. I never kind of feel, I want to have my heart broken today. So I haven't seen it. And strangely also, it is not on Netflix. And I think there is some kind of international rights issue, which means that it's not available to see.
That's not good. Someone will buy it up. People need properties now.
There is an audience for it. So, well, as is traditional, shall I tell you the story?
You shall.
So, My Neighbour Totoro, it's an animated Japanese family film set in post-war Japan. I think the 1950s or maybe the 1960s. Did you get that kind of feeling? That's the vibe, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, the dad loading up the van and moving them out to the country. Yeah, it felt like, 60s, 70s maybe at the latest.
So it's the Kusakabe family. They're moving out to the country. The father, Tatsuo, and his daughter, Satsuki, who's about 10, and May, who I read apparently is 4. I think she's a pretty young 4. If she is 4, she looks to me more like she's a 3-year-old. She's very little. So they move into a run-down, dusty, rickety old house that might even possibly be haunted, filled with soot sprites, dominated by an enormous camphor tree in the back garden. And this whole adventure of moving to the country is tremendously exciting for these 2 young girls, and it distracts them from their own worries about their hospitalized mother, Yasuko, who I reckon she's in a sanitarium recovering from TB.
Okay.
I think in the 50s, this was pretty much the only treatment really available for TB. People had this notion that you had to go somewhere and rest and get a lot of fresh air. And that was the only way that people recovered. I think there is a chance maybe that for pulmonary TB, you might have a pneumonectomy, you might have a bit of your lung surgically removed. But otherwise, the pharmaceutical treatments weren't really there. So it was just lots of fresh air and rest. That was all you could look forward to. So I'm pretty sure the mother has TB.
Okay.
It's never specified.
No.
So anyway, Satsuki has to go to school. She's 10, but May, only 4, she stays at home and she plays in the garden. And there she meets two little creatures who look a cross between a rabbit and a fox and a cat. And these are forest spirits. So chasing them leads her into the heart of the camphor tree, and there she meets the huge sleeping Totoro, the tree spirit. He looks like a 9-foot tall version of the smaller spirits, but with some added bear and with these kind of weird, boxy human teeth. To any sensible person, Totoro will be terrified, but May is delighted. And her sister and her father, they do not see Totoro until a lot later in the film. Later in the film, the two girls are waiting at the bus stop for their father one rainy evening, and Totoro comes and visits them again. But even though they are adapting to life in the country and to living next door to this enormous tree spirit, when the girls get a telegram from their mother's doctor, they suddenly realize how fragile their existence is. And after exhausting all other options, Satsuki turns to Totoro for help. And that is the first 2/3 of the movie, I think. So first time you've seen this film, am I right? I think it's my 4th time I've seen it.
Oh, yeah. First time for sure.
What did you think?
I think in retrospect, this is the better film of the two that we're talking about. I think,
well, that's faint praise if ever I heard it.
I think that it's so much more focused. I mean, it's a very personal story, so it just has a very linear feel to it. So it's very focused. I could follow this story. I could not follow The Boy and the Heron very well. So, I liked it. I liked the characters, the wood sprites. And I'm dying to see a remake or a sequel called Cocaine Totoro, because I think that now we're talking. I think that would be a film right there. But he has this big bear-like creature, and it's interesting because he's the titular character, but he doesn't have any dialogue. He's really not in the film a whole lot.
He's in 4 scenes, I think, isn't he?
That it?
I mean, I think he makes 4 appearances in the whole film. Yeah,
he's basically demonstrating sleep apnea in the first scene, and then waiting for a bus. I love that. There's a real sense of. I liked some of the values in this film. There's a real sense of public transportation in this film, which I thought was great.
Yes.
Very good advice about clean living in terms of eating good vegetables and living a healthy lifestyle. So I love some of the messages, and I think these are all sort of kids' films that obviously adults can relate to as well. But I'm glad you mentioned that it's a kids' film, because I think you have to look at it with those eyes. And kids get in trouble, and that's why this film works, is because the May character just keeps running away. I think there are 2 or 3 pivotal scenes where it's basically, let's go look for the little one.
Yes.
And that, I think we can all relate to that. So that makes it a very, very human story, even though you've got these bizarre creatures. And this is where you called them, they were called soot mites or
soot sprites.
Soot sprites. I've heard, and they called them a few different things early on in the film, but then we find out that the neighbor, who has these great powers or, knows about the magic, she finally calls them soot sprites. Yeah. It was eye-opening, because I've seen bits and pieces of so many of his films, but I was glad to hear that you were a big fan of this film. And I'm always amazed that it's 1988, and I'm also amazed that it's the Fanning girls. Is that because they weren't that age when this film was made, were they? Did they go back and dub it later or something?
I think there was an original English dub with actors who are not very well known, and then I think it may possibly be Disney who then kind of got distribution rights, who did a Staria dub in about 2003, I think. Originally, when the film was released, it was not a hit. It didn't really make money. And I think it's only off the strength of merchandising and the cute animals that it gradually grew in reputation. And then kind of became a hit rather after the fact.
Yeah.
I mean, I've already given away, I've already told you what's in my hand. I love this film.
Yeah.
I'm biased. I've seen it several times. It delights me every time. It delighted me again watching it this time.
Yeah.
I think, and I still think I said the same thing when we discussed it at the popcorn counter.
Yeah.
This is one of the best cinematic explorations of the world of very young children.
Yeah.
Like the world of the preschooler.
Yep.
It's just like it really captures that kind of preschool play.
Yep.
She picks flowers from the garden and she puts them on her father's desk and she says, "You be the flower shop."
Yeah.
That's just the way that little children play. I remember playing like that. I just take such joy watching like the animation of the children. Like they run and they tumble and they fall over and they get up again.
Yeah.
And the whole world is scary and exciting and joyous and new. A film is packed with all these wonderful details. There's just a simple shot of water flowing down a stream, which just really reminds me of like that simple joy of you standing on a little footbridge and watching the water go underneath your feet.
Yeah,
like the hedgerows and the shrubs, the way that May gives her big sister like this little girl hug when she goes to see her at school.
Yep.
I think it was tremendously well observed. I did read that apparently Miyazaki based May on his own niece, and I'm sure must have spent a long time watching how she moves and drawing her, because it feels like a very well captured 3 or 4 year old child. And again, it's autobiographical insofar as we said before the break. So Miyazaki moved to the country from Tokyo at a young age.
Yep.
His mother had TB, spent many years in hospital. It's all those details are kind of autobiographical again.
Yeah, something I like about this film is that it's really coherent in a way that Boy and the Heron is not, and yet it gets these moments of imagination or incoherence out of the fact that it's sort of told through a young person's eyes. So it gets the playfulness of it. There's plenty of imagination in this film, and we're not really sure if any of these sprites really exist or whatnot, or if they're just the invention of a child's imagination. But it holds really well together as a story, because it's basically just about running away, getting lost, exploring this world, at the same time being tied down by the fact that there's this problem in the family about the mother's sickness or her illness. So I think it's compact. It's very coherent in that sense. There aren't these wild ramblings through dreams that make it harder to understand and less relatable. This is a very relatable film.
Should we? I always wonder whether it's worth ringing the spoiler bell for a 35-year-old film, but we probably should. Some people haven't seen it. Should we ring the bell?
Yeah, let's go.
Go on, we'll ring the bell.
Wake up that Totoro dude.
So, the first time I watched this film, very first time, I was a little bit surprised that it didn't go all in and let the mother die. Because Disney were happy to kill Bambi's mother, weren't they?
Yeah.
And I remember the first time round kind of thinking, they chickened out a little bit there. But I think the more times I've seen it, and this time more than any time, I've really kind of keyed into the distress of the children at the possibility of the mother dying.
Yeah.
And I kind of realised you don't need to actually kill her to explore that emotional landscape of the fear of her death. To them, it's a very, very real, vivid crisis. She doesn't have to actually die for us to see, how emotional they get about it. Just getting the telegram, that kind of is like the mother dies. It seems so very real to them that, I think it would be unfair really to hit the audience harder than that personally. But I don't know, did you come away feeling that they chickened out?
Well, I think they scare you enough, right? By getting the telegram, and then they start racing to the hospital. You feel like, she's definitely in bad shape, which is not the case at all. So it's sort of like pulling the rug out of your feet, out from under the feet of the viewer a little bit. You're setting them up and then fooling them a little bit. So I kind of like that. He has darkness in these films, and I think he's got some great. I like his darkness in the sense that there's some creatures that seem scary, but they're actually not so scary. Or you talked about the teeth and even the warts on the old ladies. It's dark, but I like his darkness because it's there, and yet it's not necessarily that frightening once you start to explore it. So I'm not surprised that he didn't. I'm not surprised that he decides not to kill the mother. I'm not even sure what she has for an illness. That was the other thing. I was also thinking, is this did she have a mental breakdown? Is she having some sort of mental health issues? Because it seems like it's a permanent state to the point where, they move, right? They move closer to the hospital just to be closer to her. So, not knowing what her mental condition is, it's hard to say, because you sort of have to set up a death. How she's not going to die of resting in a sanitarium, right? If the tuberculosis is really bad, then sure. Or, if she dies by suicide, that would be tragic. But, if she's in an institution, that would be set up anyway if that was an institution. So I'm glad you sort of explored it and came to this conclusion that there's tuberculosis involved, because I did not know why she was there. And then you see the next film and, oh God, he has another mother who's in a hospital. And then the stepmother, she's actually ill too. She should probably be in a hospital, or she's, convalescing at home. It's all this sort of tragic ill mother stuff going on in these films. And so I wasn't surprised. I think his darkness is elsewhere. I think like being swallowed by a group of really aggressive frogs, that's scary to me. And this film has things like that too. So he's always got darkness, but it's either absurd enough that it's not frightening, or it's all from this point of view of, if you explore it with like a child's wonder, you realize that what we consider dark and fearsome might not be that at all, as long as we get to know it.
Yep.
Something.
It's an idea you've already touched on. So maybe you've already answered this in your mind. I was going to ask you, is Totoro real in the world of this film?
I don't think so. No, I think it's just because, remember, she's out wandering in the garden. May's out wandering in the garden, and similar to, again, Boy and the Heron, doesn't she go through this almost tunnel of shrubbery?
Yeah.
And I love the camphor tree, because it's just, I had to look up camphor trees online because I couldn't imagine that they would be that big, but they apparently do get huge. So she really goes into this other world. This is a classic thing of just going through a door or a window or something, going into this other world. So I think it is the imagination, and the neighbor relates to that, and you get the idea that I think they call her Granny, don't they? Yeah, Granny.
Yes. Yep.
They call her Granny, and it's like she probably had these same imaginative journeys when she was a 3 and 4-year-old, when she was living there too. So I just feel like no, because also, as much as I love the idea of a cat fox bus, I don't think that exists either, other than in the imaginations of the children. But that's the great thing. I feel like the values or the themes of this film are fantastic. I mean, I love the fact that they are waiting for a bus. It's just beautiful. You don't see that very often. And they're waiting for a bus in the rain, and then this massive psychedelic cat comes up and picks them up. Totoro shows the way. He gets on the bus the first time. I don't think they get on the bus the first time, but then when they really need it, the bus comes again later. The cat bus comes later, and sort of ends the film with the cat bus too. So I really like that.
So apparently when Miyazaki met Akira Kurosawa, Kurosawa's one big comment to him was, I really love that cat bus. I wish I could do something like that in the film, but it's difficult with live action. Yes. The cat bus is a brilliant invention. A little bit like with the Boy and the Heron, I think there are cues that make you suggest that Totoro is not real, because he's associated with sleep, isn't he?
Yes.
May is constantly kind of falling asleep before or after Totoro appears.
Yep.
So I suspect in the world of the film, Totoro probably isn't real, but if he is a dream, he is a shared dream, because Satsuki sees him just as well as May does.
But one time they see him, I think Satsuki sees him too at the same time. They're dreaming at night, because Totoro comes to the garden. There's this thing where Totoro's given them acorns. There are acorns everywhere in this film, and then Totoro's given them acorns to plant and grow a forest, which is, again, I love the sort of this environmentalist touch to it. And the girls wake up and they see him. He's just kind of cruising around the garden at night, walking around, and it's as if they're dreaming that moment too. I mean, I think there's always this assumption that if something's happening at night when they're supposed to be asleep, then in fact they actually are asleep and dreaming it. But then it doesn't. The other sisters, it's Satsuki, right? Satsuki?
Yeah, Satsuki.
Satsuki. She eventually sees Totoro at the bus stop, I think, and that's when she finally realizes, oh, now I've seen Totoro. But so that a little confusing. But as you said, he's in there about 4 or 5 times in the whole film, and it's set up so that yes, absolutely, he could be a dream thing. Oh, there's this wonderful moment too where it's almost marsupial-like. They climb onto his belly and then he flies them up to the top of the camphor tree to show them. It's awesome. That was great. So, I mean, there's some trippy imagery in here, which is great because I find a lot of Miyazaki's stuff is actually, it feels kind of conservative in a way. There's very, like the backgrounds are always very static and then you've got this movement, animated movement going through these really static images. And I wouldn't say, I mean, obviously some of the images are just so trippy and adventurous that you think, okay, this is wild. But at the same time, he never really explores anything too radical, I don't think. It's a strange combination of really conservative filmmaking, but at the same time, super imaginative filmmaking, I guess.
I mean, I think both of these films have this very distinct Japanese flavor because I think they're both, especially Totoro, they are kind of about animism. Mm-hmm. They're about Shinto, which is like the ancient religion of Japan. It's like the most prevalent religion in Japan, which all revolves around spirits, kind of these which are called kami. Yeah. This notion of that there are spirits in all things. There are spirits in places. There are spirits in objects. Spirits, occupy or control the forces of nature. Spirits are all around us.
Yeah.
One of the very first things the children pass in Totoro when they're in this van driving to their new house, they pass a cat shrine. Which is like a little shrine to a cat spirit.
Yeah.
And then immediately they pass that, they're driving towards this huge camphor tree. It's all about the kind of spirits of the natural world. It's about kind of living in harmony with the natural world. I mean, it features actual, real tree hugging. Somebody actually physically hugs a tree. I mean, you can't get clearer than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one other screenwritery type question.
Yeah.
I think I probably know what your answer will be, but I'd be interested to hear if it's what I predict. That typical screenwriter question: whose story do you think this is?
I think it's May's. I think it's May's story.
Yeah.
She's the one they're all chasing in so many scenes, and I think just by the virtue of it feeling that imaginative and that dreamscapey, I think it's the story of the May child. She's, as you said, 3-4 years old. I don't know, but young person for sure. Who can imagine a cat bus?
Yeah.
I think it's definitely her story. I mean, her father's kind of distant. He sort of drops them off, and he's teaching at university, and then Granny's sort of the secondary character. So, you could say it's a sister story between the two of them, but I think May gets much more of the screen time and like she gets the adventures, and that's why I'd say it was her story.
Yeah, she is the prime mover, isn't she, I think?
Yeah, and there's this one, we were talking about the darkness, and I would come back to it because it's related to May, is that I think the darkest part of the film in some ways is when they find this sandal. May has gone missing, and they're looking for her everywhere. There's search parties, and they unearth this sandal that they think is hers from a pond. And I think, again, that's sort of a tip to the fact that it's kind of May's story because, we're really concerned about her. And that's a dark image. I mean, that's the kind of darkness that I like that he does, is that, he's going to make you think for at least a second that May is gone.
Yeah.
That she's died, that she's succumbed to her own adventure. So I think that's the kind of darkness that I like in the film, and that sort of confirms for me that it's really May's story. She's the most important character.
It's interesting you're kind of commenting about the dad being a little bit sort of emotionally unavailable.
Yeah.
What is sweet, at least, I think if this were a Western film, then the dad would, almost certainly tell the girls, "Don't be so stupid. Eat your vegetables.
Yeah.
Come in. It's getting cold outside. Bring wood for the fire, or whatever." Whereas in this film, the dad says, "Oh well, it must be the tree spirits," and thank you, tree spirits, for looking after us.
Yeah.
And he's he takes the girls' thoughts and concerns and interests seriously. He doesn't kind of poo-poo them or tell them they're dumb or change the subject or whatever. Guy's a good dad.
Yeah.
He's doing well.
Yeah, and he seems pretty psyched to have his kids in a place where they can really just run wild and let their imaginations run wild as well.
It's like, it's an ideal childhood, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Well, now that we've talked about emotionally unavailable parents and ideal childhoods, let's play our favourite game. Let's play Who Am I?
Who am I?
So every episode we watch two films and we kind of ask each other, well, can you see yourself in either of these films? Supposedly we go to the cinema to see ourselves. Yeah. Did you see yourself this week?
Well, I'm not that animated. I guess I saw myself I loved seeing myself in the self-inflating, fish-eating potato puff sprites. I think that was, and I think they had a name. Were they the Wawas or something like that?
The Wara Wara, I think.
Wara Wara. You've got it. Well, the Wara Waras. I would be a Wara Wara, I think. And I hope I'm one that can spin through that big DNA spiral in the sky and make it into the stars. But I'd probably be picked off by a pelican. How about yourself?
Easy one for me this week. Because I know I've seen this film 4 or 5 times, I think I am May, basically. Because I think everyone who views My Neighbour Totoro kind of is May, I think.
Yeah.
At least everybody watching the film has once been 3 years old.
Yeah.
And the world that she lives in is a lot like a version of the world that I remember from my own childhood. Where kind of, I picture my own childhood. It is a kind of endless summer, sort of playing in the dirt, making up games.
Yep.
Seeing the world from about 18 inches above the ground. Like, really observing that hidden world of flowers and bugs and worms and tunnels under bushes. I can vividly remember that. And also she has a 6-year age gap with her older sibling, which is just the same as me.
Oh, really?
So I think I used to copy everything my older brother did. Just the same way that May does in the film. That Satsuki does something and May immediately just does the same thing. It's sweet, but it's funny because it's true.
She is one of those universal characters that's really easy to relate to. And that's what I said. That's the big difference between the two films for me is just better understanding, better relating to the Totoro story.
Well, should we? So I think we've already done half of this work.
Yeah.
But should we see whether we can draw the two films together? We'll do our synthesis.
We can do it. We can do it.
We can do it.
We can build it.
Get eaten by a pelican. I think these films, they're both very accomplished. I think they're both beautifully animated. I think they are both fairly remarkable family films.
Yep.
They have a lot in common, though. Like you've said, they both feature anthropomorphized fantasy animals. Mm-hmm. They both have magical gateways to another world. Mm-hmm. They both have kind of a version of a giant tower with a secret at the base.
Yes. Yep.
They both have cute little creatures that drift across the screen.
Yep.
They both have mothers in distress and children struggling without them. These films have a lot of common ground. They are. Yeah. I wrote in my notes they are chapters from the same book.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We talked about motifs earlier and his broad strokes. I think that's what makes them feel so similar. For me, the big similarity is. It's sort of like magical thinking. And I say that because it seems like both films are about children using magic and imagination to get through difficult times, right? They both have they're so similar, right? They both have mothers who are ill and they have to move to a new place and explore a new world while they're processing grief or while they're processing some sort of family trauma. So I think that's it. And I love the idea of using your imagination to make your world better. I think that the crick in it all for me is that I think sometimes animators go overboard and get too imaginative. And I think the big difference here is that I think there's a lot more restraint in Totoro than there is in The Boy and the Heron. And I think I liked it more and I could follow it more because of that. So with animation, it's almost like you've given yourself the permission structure to just put whatever the hell you want to on screen. And in The Boy and the Heron, there's some wild stuff that's on screen, and I love looking at crazy stuff, but for me, it has to be more coherent. Whereas the wild stuff that happens on screen in terms of like forests growing overnight in Totoro, or a cat bus, or just Totoro himself just being such an excellent character. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I think I can handle, I can process it. Whereas a lot of is it Kikiro's the fisher person and savior. I mean, everything that happens, the story just fell away from me so quickly once that scene happens. It's sort of like Mahito's going out of the castle for the first time. He passes through this gate, Kikoro picks him up and goes fishing with him, and then all of a sudden we're with the architect and the stone has powers, and then the Jenga tower of 13 pieces has powers, and then the parakeets have powers. I just got lost, and I think it
just gets out of hand.
It's like too much imagination, and I hate saying that because we should be really imaginative as a species, but animators have this tendency to maybe go a little bit too far, whereas Totoro works because it's a contained story. It's really easy to understand. You're not going into world within world and within world. So it just, it makes it a stronger film as a result. So that's kind of how they're similar, but it also draws a huge distinction between the two.
Yep. I was thinking, about the few differences between these films. And I think the biggest one is kind of something we've already alluded to with in Totoro. The mother survives. In The Boy and the Heron. She does not.
Yeah.
I like the new film. It's just so much more dour. It's somber and serious. I can't remember Mojito, the lead character in The Boy and the Heron, laughing at all. I can't remember him smiling at all.
Yeah. I wrote that in my notes at one point. I'm writing in the dark. I wrote down the word mirthless.
Ah, yeah.
When I was watching that film. Mirthless.
My Neighbour Totoro is like, the film is like a big hug. It kind of, you leave the film like feeling like the world will look after you, that there is a benign force somehow out there that you can call on for help.
Yeah.
It leaves you with the sense, yes, children will be protected. The world is not utter chaos.
Yeah.
Whereas The Boy and the Heron, suggests basically the opposite.
Yeah.
The kind of the punchline to The Boy and the Heron, it tells us that our world has been made by a capricious god, some old grey uncle playing with shapes.
Yep.
It tells you death is inevitable. It cannot be escaped. And even though his mother, Hisako, she says, I am happy to return to my time and die in the fire because then I will be mother to you. It's a sweet idea. But it's not an upbeat ending to the film.
No.
Basically, I came away from The Boy and the Heron with the idea that pain is inevitable and meaningless.
Yeah.
History will repeat itself. You can do your best with your new family, but there's no easy solutions.
Yeah.
And I think part of this will be to do with the time of life in which these films have been made during Miyazaki's career, but also, like you said at the very beginning, Totoro is a film from the 80s.
Yeah.
That was a more optimistic time. The late 80s. The world was still our oyster. Whereas The Boy and the Heron, it's a film of today. It's a film, made in a world where bombs drop on children. Yeah. Be it in the Ukraine or the Middle East or wherever.
Yeah.
A world where actually there is not a great deal of the sense of justice or safety or protection. It's a film of our times, but our times are pretty blimmin' dour.
Well, yeah, and if it took 10 years to make, then it suggests that the last 10 years have been fairly dour.
God, and they have been, haven't they?
It's a long time, yeah. I got one question I want to pose to you, and it's sort of just about the animation itself. It seems like the characters, the lead characters especially, seem very, very white. And I don't know if this is because he's making films for international audiences in both of these films. It's kind of unsettling because then other faces seem very, very Japanese. So it's got this international feel. I think there's only one scene in The Boy and the Heron where you see black characters, and it's a ghostly scene. They're sort of black, but then you look at them and they're skeletons inside of these black.
Oh, yes, rowing those big boats.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it seems very odd to me. And then you couple that with hearing some weird, like American accents. And I don't know if he does that intentionally. What's your take on that? Like, you don't see strictly Japanese faces. You see a lot of the main characters in both films seem very, very white to me. And then, you see you do see like Japanese characters, but not in the lead roles necessarily. And maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but they just seems a little bit whitewashed somehow.
I am no authority on this in any way.
Yeah.
I am kind of aware that Japan is still a much more kind of racially and culturally homogenous country.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it can be a not very welcoming country to not Japanese people. I can only say this anecdotally and not as a rule. But I think there's a kind of convention within anime that, because all of the people who are making the film are, fairly racially and culturally homogenous,
Yeah.
then any character you draw in any way will be a Japanese person, because that's all you see around you and that's all you see in the streets.
Yeah.
So I think everybody is intended to look Japanese.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of anime trope, I think, that some characters have, big eyes and kind of quite Western-looking features, but they're still intended to be Japanese.
Okay.
I think that's what it is. Yeah. But I am very happy if somebody writes in and tells me I've got that completely wrong.
Yeah, I'd love to know how we're supposed to read that, because it is interesting to me. And then I don't know where Christian Bale was coming from, because he was an airplane, I don't know, cockpit glass factory maker, something like that. Sounded very just Bostonian, rugged guy, and it was just odd. It was really odd. So I mean, it's interesting that you match these voices to these faces, and you just everything was unexpected. I guess it made it hard to find the terra firma there. And then the other thing I was going to ask you about was the ugliness of old people in his films, because they always just, I mean, they're beyond wrinkled. They usually have warts, and then their heads are much larger than their bodies, and it's almost ageist. It seems. And to see him doing it at 83, he's still making them look like this.
I think it must be the only way he can draw them, I suppose.
Okay.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it is not a flattering portrayal of elderly people. No. But it's difficult to imagine the young people in the film ever becoming the elderly people that we see in the film.
Exactly. Yeah.
They appear to be completely different species. I'm guessing again, it's a sort of an accepted convention or a trope.
Yeah,
but it's peculiar, isn't it? I know. Yeah, to the Western eye, it looks a little bit peculiar.
Okay. Thank you. Shed some light in it for me anyway.
I've been bursting to get to the next bit of the podcast all week.
Oh wow!
And you will understand why in a minute.
I'm excited.
Why don't we talk about what has also been playing at this theatre? And I've got to go first. I've been bursting to talk about this because what's also been playing at our theatre is last April, we bought some tickets which finally came round this week. We went to the Barbican in London to see the Royal Shakespeare Company stage production of My Neighbour Totoro. I can't believe how incredibly well it's worked out. So we bought the tickets 9 months ago, and then we've actually seen the show 2 days before recording the podcast.
Wow!
So we went to see the live action version of My Neighbour Totoro.
That's amazing.
Just perfect.
Amazing! And it's Royal Shakespeare Company.
It is, yeah. It's and happily, the live version is just great.
Oh wow!
It's great. The children are played by adults.
Yeah.
But they do a kind of a great version of a 10 and a 4-year-old.
Yep.
Totoro is played by an enormous puppet operated by 6 or 8 people.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it is literally a 9-foot tall puppet. He is life size. He's absolutely enormous. Very skillfully animated by the puppeteers. They have a sizable band. They're on stage in the branches of a tree at the back of the stage. I mean, it's beautifully staged. It's beautifully put on. But interestingly, the film is 88 minutes. The live version is 2 hours 20. Oof. Plus a 20-minute interval. So they have had to add on nearly an extra hour of material to make it into like a full stage production. So it's interesting to see what they stretched out and what they did.
Yeah.
So they've added some songs. Which is kind of fun enough. Okay, so there are some songs, and there are like a few new scenes. There is a new scene where Kanta, who is the little boy who has a crush on Satsuki, he has like this scene with his dad, who doesn't appear in the film at all, where his dad is telling him how to talk to girls. So that kind of like a few extra scenes that have just been completely invented. Granny has a scene with Satsuki where she explains that she had a sister who died. The whole show really leans into this theme of death much harder than the film. Satsuki has like a tantrum telling Mei, that their mother might die. I mean, they really they play that out very loud and clear. Which means then that kind of come the end of the film, the end of the play, oh my goodness, listen to me, when it turns out that, the mother has not died and she is all right. And the girls are watching from the tree as their mother and father are talking, has a much bigger emotional impact. It's a bigger relief because people have been talking about people dying, for the last 2 hours, 15 minutes, and now it turns out, she didn't die, she's all right, and she comes home, and it's a big relief. It's very sweetly adapted. It's a very good piece of work. They've done very well.
Do you know who adapted it for the stage?
Oh God, I should have put that in my notes. It is an English guy, I think. So it's adapted by a Brit. I'm guessing the same team who did a stage adaptation of Spirited Away, which was a big hit on the London stage about 5 years ago or so.
Oh wow!
So this, I'm guessing, was the obvious next move. But brilliantly done. They do the whole cat bus live on stage. Oh. There is a cat bus. It's an enormous inflatable. Oh. Again, so skillfully done.
That's terrific.
Yeah, it's great. So they've really, really gone for it, and it really, really works. It's a blast.
What about the camphor tree? Do they try and reproduce that somehow?
Well, the camphor tree is like the whole of the back end of the stage is just this one enormous tree.
Perfect.
And they have the band kind of on all these platforms in the branches of the tree.
Oh, that's great.
But then they also bring in a forest, and they do build a tree in the middle of the stage as well.
Wow.
So they have put a lot of effort into staging it.
Very nice.
Very skillfully done.
Wow. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 5-star hit. There's no missing.
Oh, wow.
It's a great version.
How appropriate for the podcast.
So I can't believe it worked out so well.
Very well.
So I think that there must be a spirit of the podcast.
Yeah.
It's watching down upon us from atop that aerial.
God, the Barbican was always a weird place to go, though. Is it just this block of, fascist architecture and all these little...
It's kind of, brutalist, isn't it?
It's very brutal. My God.
It really, really looks like the setting for an early 80s science fiction film.
Absolutely, yeah.
To the extent that there are bits that we recognise from the Disney television series Andor.
Oh, really?
So, literally, they did film some bits of the evil empire in the Barbican because it's just so appropriate. Yes, it really does look like the base of the evil empire. What was playing at your theatre this week? Please tell me you saw a live version of The Boy and the Heron.
Oh, oof. If I saw an advertisement for it, I'm not sure I would buy a ticket to the I saw something that I don't think anyone's going to have a chance to see, but if it comes up, try. So there's a gallery near here that has a pretty good film series, and they showed a main film called Hangdog. Huh. So it's shot right here in Portland by a husband and wife team. I think he directed and she wrote a script. Super low budget. Looked pretty nice. I think they're more documentarians, and I think they've done some commercials too, because they alluded to the fact that they spent less to make this film than they were paid to make a commercial for LL Bean, which is a sort of a department store, an outdoors store here. So it's really well done. They got some great performances, and Portlanders love to see their city on screen. So it's a little bit of that postcard filmmaking where they've got all the major sites, and they've, really exhausted all the good views of the city. But it's a nice little story about a guy who's probably depressed, and his wife goes away, and he has to take care of their dog, and he loses the dog while he's buying some cannabis to address his mental health issues. And then he just spends 3 days looking for the dog in the city, and has some what is that, like a shaggy dog adventure, I guess is what it ultimately is. And it's well done. It's really well acted. I think that makes a big difference, because you can definitely see that it's low budget at times, but they did a nice job. It's one of the best films out of this area that I've seen in the last 10 years for sure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's nice. They don't have a trailer on YouTube, which to me was bizarre.
Yeah, that's mad.
And they are worried that it doesn't have much play outside of New England, but they're going to try and shop it a little bit. So I think it came out just in the last couple of months, so it's still sort of fresh, and they're looking for some distribution somehow. But I hope they do well with it, because it definitely could use some eyes on it, and I think it's worth the while. It's, again, short film, probably 90 minutes, and they did a good job. So it's called Hangdog. Yeah.
Hangdog. There is a really vibrant local film industry in your town, isn't there?
Fairly, yeah. Well, I mean, it's the only city in the state, and a lot of people have moved here, especially since COVID. So we've got talent, but most of these people have to go other places to work on jobs for short periods of time, then come back here because they want to live here, they want to base themselves here. There's not a whole lot being made, but people are definitely trying stuff. And the thing about this area is it's a very cooperative and collaborative place. So we've got all these breweries. We have probably 30 breweries right here, and a lot of them, they work together. Oh. So the whole idea is that you're not really just, trying to compete against each other around here. You're definitely trying to collaborate because you can't do anything alone here because it's just too small. We don't have the resources. So there's a real collaborative spirit. So you definitely see people working on a number of different films, and you sadly you start to see the same actors again and again. But they brought in some outside acting, which was good. But yeah, I think there's a collaborative spirit, and there are a lot of creative people here who want to just do stuff, even if it doesn't, cost a lot of money to do it, or if they don't have big budgets, they're still going to do it. So I think that has some effect on the way we make things here. But we're doing pretty well, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Frog in my throat.
For a few months now, our listeners are getting sick and tired of hearing this cough throughout the podcasts. I've had emails about this. So, James, you need to get well. I don't know what it takes. Maybe go to a sanitarium somewhere.
Go to a sanitarium. Yes, exactly. There is a chance I might die.
Sit on a cloud and read a book.
Well, I hope maybe the cough will be better for next week. Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Well, next week.
Next week we're talking about the end, I think, aren't we? And then after that, it's American fiction.
Yes.
Very exciting. We will be comparing to the Sidney Poitier film from 1961, A Raisin in the Sun, which I have never seen. So very excited to watch that.
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
And then following that, it's episode 100 coming up.
God, 100.
Not long to go now.
Wow.
We need to plan something. We need to do something for episode 100. Oh my God, we need to do something.
Something special. 100 episodes. Thank you, listeners, for hanging with us for the first 100. Amazing.
Here's to many hundreds more. Yeah. Thank you, as always, for joining us. We weren't serious about the many hundreds. Please don't go. Join us next time at the Popcorn Counter, and then for American Fiction, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. See you soon.